Hello and welcome in yet another Java video. Today what I want to show you is actually a very simple at first glance task for recruitment that we can solve together, and I want to show you how to think whenever we've got a task such as this and what to watch out for, what questions to ask yourself and the recruiter, and how to actually succeed in making it happen with this particular exercise. So the task here is seemingly simple. Is to create a method that will sum up a list of numbers. So whenever we're talking about numbers, of course, there are different types of numbers that we can use in Java, right? We've got doubles, we've got longs, and we've got ints, for example, and floats. So the question here first is going to be, what type of number are we talking about? So in our case, it's going to be integers. And the next question is, are those primitives or are those objects? And in our case, it's going to be primitives. Another question is going to be, it's a task to sum up a list. But whenever we're talking about a list, is it a linked list? Is it an array list? Is it even a list in a sense that it's a collection list? Or is it just another way of saying that it's going to be an array? In our case, it is going to be an array. And the next question is, how big of an array can it be? Is it going to be up to 10 numbers? Is it going to be up to 10,000 numbers? Or maybe even 1 million? And in our case, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be max size of an array. Of course, we're going to be talking about what does it actually mean for it to be max size of an array in just a second. So, starting out with an exercise that is create a method that will sum up a list of numbers, we run into an exercise that is create a method that will sum up an array of a size up to max size of an array, sum up an array of ints of a size of up to max size of an array. Okay, so now it means that we will get this array as an input, but the question is whether we will be getting this as an input from a file, whether we will be getting this as an input just in the code, or how it will work. And the answer will be, for that particular question, array will be supplied via code. So it means that there is no need to actually write additional utility that will allow us to read things from a file, for example, like a CSV or anything other or any other format. So key questions here whenever we are being asked to do an exercise. First of all, what is the scope of the data? Like what is actually the, until we hear a concrete, let's say, object, primitive, or anything of sorts, it's going to be very, very hard to guess what are actually going to be solving. Second, if we are talking about any sort of collection, right, or an array, we need to determine what it is exactly going to be as an input. And of course, we need to talk about potentially something that we will need to use to solve this particular exercise. And if we're talking about collections or any sort of data structure, we need to know what is going to be the max size of this data structure. So yeah, now that we've got this information, where the input will come from, we can actually start coding. So let's think for a little while, what do we need to do this? So we are going to be getting as an input some sort of an array that we will need to go through, sum up all the elements, and return the value. So that is actually pretty straightforward. So in order to fix this, or rather do this, we need to create a method that's going to be public. We won't need anything within our SumNumbers class. So there won't be any fields, meaning that we can just make it static. So public, static. Let's first return an int, because my gut feeling is if we are summing up int numbers, it means that those will be whole numbers and we don't need to worry about any sort of a double or float or anything like that. So let's call it sum up an array, And as an input, we'll be getting an array of ints. And right now, let's do it pretty straightforward. We'll create a variable that will hold up our sum. We'll create a for loop. And then at the end, we want to return the value. And the way that I'm talking right now, so actually describing what we're going to do is the way that I want you to talk with the recruiter whenever you're talking about your solution, right? So before writing out the code, I'm telling exactly what I want to do. So let's create our sum that will be equal to 0. Let's create our for loop. For int I equal to 0, I smaller than array dot length, so that we go through all the elements, I plus plus, and sum is going to be equal to array of I, and we are going to be returning I. Sorry, not I, but sum. So this is a naive approach to solving this question, right? Because I have missed one very, very important factor here. This array can be of a size up to max size of an array. So a very, very nice trap that is going to be set here by the recruiter, because this here is not really something that the recruiter is looking for, right? Summing up an array is a very, very simple task, and this is not what is being actually tested here. What is being tested here is the knowledge about data types that we are using and actually the collection, or rather the data structure that we are using. So just to explain what is happening here. We are summing up ints into an int value. So let's think a little bit about what can happen. If the array can go up to the max value of the length, let's check first what is going to be the max size of an array of ints, right? So in order to determine that, we've got this array.length, right? So this is the variable, or rather the field within array, that is going to tell us how big can any sort of array get. And just a spoiler alert, this is an int. It means that it has the same size 2 to the power of 32 as an int max value. So it can get quite big. And if we think about it, if we want to sum up, for example, an array filled with 2's that is filled up to the size of the integer, so integer max value, it means that our int here that we are using as a sum won't really work. Because if we are talking also about the length, it can also be that it can be just a two element array, and one of the items is of the size of integer max int, and the other is just 1. So what will happen? I want to just show you, because it's very, very important to know what are the limitations of the data types that we have in Java. So let's try to create an array. Int array equals integer dot max value 1. And let's do, or even 10, like it doesn't matter what we put here, but let's print out some numbers that sum up an array, and let's put our array here. And what I want to show you is something that you will also need to know whenever we're talking about ints. So what will actually happen, right? Will there be an exception? Will there something be broken? So let's check in the actual result, and as you can see, it has gone over the counter and has gone to the minus values, to the negative values. So this is a very, very big mistake that we need to fix before we are able to even do anything with it. So that's actually what we need to watch out for. So this is the edge case that we will run into whenever our sum that we put over here as the variable responsible for storing up the sum of the array goes over the limit of an int. So we can combat this in multiple manners. For example, introducing an exception whenever we run into such a case, or underflow exception or overflow exception, because this is called, in this case, overflow, because this also can happen if we go from negative values as well, right? So we can go into minus negative values, and then it goes into plus, right? It goes into positives. So this is still something that we don't want to happen. So we need to actually make it safe from both underflow and overflow. But then the question is how to actually do it. We can do it via some custom exceptions. We can do it via checking the sound that when it approaches the maximum integer, or actually what we can do is be a bit more lazy and show that we know what we are doing. So the worst case scenario that we can have is an array with a length of integer max value filled with actually items that are only integer max value. So this is the biggest array that we can possibly get within our code. And this is the edge case that the recruiter is looking for, and this is something that you need to prepare for, like so the worst case scenario. So in order to handle it, we can, as I've said, do all this extra work with the exceptions and all the stuff. But if we know our Java well, then we will be able to tell what can we actually do here. So the answer is very, very straightforward. If we just change 2 lines, or rather two words, and change this from int to a long, then it will fix our problem. And let me just tell you why. So as I've told you, the worst case scenario is if the numbers are 2 to the power of 32, I mean the values, and the length of the array is 2 to the power of 32. So actually the sum of it will be a result of 2 to the power of 32 times 2 to the power of 32, which if you have been watching out on your math classes, then you would know that this is just summing up of the powers of the 2. So it is going to be 2 to the power of 64. So this is actually the size of long, meaning that long will be able to handle anything we throw into this particular array. So this is the answer to this question that anybody would be looking for. But as you can see, it actually came up at the end of it, right? Because it's the best if you have seen any sort of a question, because it is pretty straightforward. If you were to know it beforehand, of course, flag it. Tell the recruiter about it, that, hey, int cannot be good here because of this particular edge case that I have told you about. But if you don't know it, you need to really think through what is happening and what can go wrong. If I run the code now, right now we've got this overflow error that is not really flagged as any sort of exception, we would need to catch it. But right now, everything is behaving properly. We've got a positive number as we would expect. So keep this in mind whenever you have a recruitment question that you are trying to learn, or you are just going through some exercises. First, you need to know what is the input, what is the size of the input and the type of the input, where does the input come from, and what can be actually done to prepare yourself to not break the code, right? What are the cases where code will break? So in this particular scenario, the exercise is very, very simple, but as you can see, actually this is not something that is being tested by the recruiter. What is being tested is the knowledge about the primitive types, about the sizes, and about the things that you can do to actually overcome those particular issues. So with that being said, I'm hoping that you have learned something out of this. If you have any questions, then head on over to the school group where I will happily answer those, where I will also be doing some questions live so that you can actually ask and see the process itself whenever I'm also doing some exercises. So with that being said, thank you very much and see you in the next video.